Formerly celebrated as Hollywood's loveliest star, she was traded for merely $500 by her biological mother. That figure was Demi Moore, a symbol of 20th century allure. Was she merely prey? No, her existence was greater than a calamity. It was living evidence that occasionally, to be cherished by the entire globe, you must initially survive being cherished by nobody and withstand the sort of isolation nobody risks defining. The public recognized Demi Moore via the memorable pottery sequence in Ghost, which turned into an enduring representation of romance. Yet few understood that beyond that blinding radiance, she once listened to her own soul reverberating within the void. Not a murmur of care, but a frantic begging, "Please rescue me." She was formerly the top-earning performer in Tinseltown, the dominant female of the 90s, respected for her looks and resilience. However, at 62, Demi Moore is no longer the icon of glamour or film love. She now rests under stark illumination, observing herself disappear into recollection, a lovely visage gradually drifting towards nothingness. The power society applauded was simply a shield. Underneath lay a female tired of constantly needing to suffice. Her narrative is not simply about stardom. It is a lifetime quest for affection, a voyage stretching over 500 years, traversing every terrain of agony. And if you have ever felt inadequate, invisible, or cherished by no one, hear this to the conclusion, because this is not solely Demi Moore's tale, it is ours, the saga of those who once stumbled and still decided to stand, even when nobody was expecting them. Demi Jean Gines arrived on November 11, 1962, in Roswell, New Mexico, a location noted for legends of flying saucers and alien riddles. Yet for Demi, the biggest enigma was never above the clouds. It was within the very home where she first wept her way into existence. From the instant she arrived, destiny appeared to ridicule her. Her biological parents separated before she even understood whom to address as dad. Her mom, a stunning but volatile female fighting liquor addiction, pulled her from town to town seeking employment, a residence, or a spark of promise, only to forfeit it all time and time again. A stepdad came into her world. When Demi was merely a small child, he was intoxicated, jobless, quick to anger, and brutal. Whenever he became inebriated, he broke objects, yelled, and struck out. Her mother, rather than shielding her, participated in his chaos. Demi's youth transpired amongst the scent of alcohol, weeping, and terror. Nobody ever embraced her tightly. Nobody ever voiced that she was adored. She learned to remain silent, to interpret the looks of grown-ups, to avoid being beaten, and to endure in a realm where affection was absent. She accepted random tasks, dozed on garden benches, and finally located employment as a poser. Her visage was mesmerizing, delicate but intense, as though it bore 1,000 concealed scars under the skin. Tinseltown spotted her, and just like that, the 17-year-old maiden, once a drifter with nowhere to head, became an ascending luminary. But the terrifying aspect was that even when the limelight started to beam on her, the gloom within never really departed. She walked into Hollywood as though stepping into a different cosmos, one where everybody grinned radiantly, but existed behind disguises. Everyone was gorgeous, self-assured, and appeared to understand exactly who they were. Everyone, barring her. the lass who had never genuinely been cherished. She attempted to plug that void with labor, with cash, with notice. She toiled compulsively, drove her physique to limits, all in a frantic effort to demonstrate she was deserving of care. Deep inside, Demi Moore remained that small child, standing in a dim chamber, observing her mom consent to vend her, murmuring to herself that if she were sufficient, perhaps she would not have done it. Then destiny led her to Freddie Moore, a singer 12 years her senior, the initial male who stated she merited to be adored. They wed, and she assumed his surname. The Globe would now recognize her as Demi Moore. But that union, like so many matters in her existence, was a mirage. Freddie strayed, and Demi stayed as isolated as before. She left him, floating once again through the turmoil of her own being. And yet, Hollywood is the sort of location where individuals are resurrected every single dawn. Then arrived the chance that altered everything. The 1990 movie Ghost, the part of a female who loses the gent she adores, yet still senses his spirit via the spectral plane. It was a character that seemed scripted solely for her. The clay-spinning sequence where two palms interlock under gentle tunes turned into a perpetual sign of romance. But for Demi, it was greater than a film shot. It was the fantasy she had pursued her whole duration, to feel a devotion that would never forsake her. Ghost was a massive triumph, turning Demi Moore into one of the most potent and coveted ladies in show business. She possessed it all: notoriety, looks, wealth, worship. Yet the more the public adored her, the more frightened she grew. Because no matter how luminous the beam glowed, it could never thaw the chill inside her. After Ghost, Demi Moore became the emblem of a whole era. She strolled the crimson rug amidst dazzling sparks and hundreds of throats yelling her moniker. Designer frocks, shining acclaim, million-dollar drafts. It all arrived surging in. Hollywood acclaimed her as the monarch of the cinema, a feminist figure, the initial female bold enough to request equal wages with males. The public respected her attractiveness, her poise, those oculars that were both piercing and soft, eyes that appeared to contain both flames and weeping simultaneously. But internally, Demi Moore remained that same soul, that identical girl who had never been loved the proper manner. She trusted that if she became renowned enough, wealthy enough, attractive enough, affection would eventually arrive. But stardom only made the vacancy resound louder. Then, one evening at a gathering, she encountered Bruce Willis, the personification of power, virility, and everything she believed she desired. They conversed, they chuckled, and merely 4 months later, they were wed. Hollywood was shocked. The media dubbed them the gilded pair of the 90s. Images of Demi in her ivory gown, Bruce grinning next to her. They resembled two luminaries who had finally located one another in the nocturnal heavens. And for a spell, it truly did appear like a storybook fable. They produced 3 daughters, Rumor, Scout, and Tallulah. They resided in a snug Idaho estate, went skiing, giggled together, and showed up hand in hand at film debuts. People remarked that finally she has located joy. However, occasionally bliss can also be a disguise. Bruce Willis was robust,
But he was never stationary. He recorded continuously, journeyed incessantly, and became a worldwide action hero. Meanwhile, Demi, a female who had utilized her entire existence fearing being deserted, remained domestic, tending to their kids in chambers that felt more vacant by the day. She adored Bruce with everything she possessed, loved him so intensely that she neglected herself. Every occasion he departed, she grew uneasy, tallying the dates until he returned. Every instance he was tardy for a ring, she pictured 100 causes why. Because for Demi, quietness had always signified being left behind. And then the fractures started to appear. Bruce grew occupied, remote, elusive. The harder Demi attempted, the more futile it seemed. She did everything to keep him near, to demonstrate that this clan was still worthy of cherishing. But the firmer she gripped, the quicker joy slid away. Some evenings she awoke in the center of the dark, gazing at the bare spot next to her, and abruptly realized the most frightening thing is not being solo. It is feeling solo while somebody is resting right beside you. When the union started to disintegrate, Demi reverted to her profession. She flung herself into labor, accepting bold, potent parts that dared Hollywood itself. In Indecent Proposal, she enacted a woman who consents to let a tycoon purchase one evening with her for $1 million. It was visceral, debatable, and unwavering, a part only Demi could have accepted because it reflected her own existence. The lass who had once been vended and later found herself trading love for care, approval, and glory. In G.I. Jane, she sheared her locks, exercised like a genuine trooper, and hurled herself into the test to demonstrate that females could be just as tough as males. The sequence of her performing press-ups, drenched in perspiration, blood, and weeping, became a badge of feminism. The public lauded her, and Hollywood dubbed her the Lady of Iron. But behind the metal was still a brittle heart. Because when the lenses ceased recording, Demi Moore was solitary again, and she still did not know who she was when she was not being cherished. In 1998, after 11 years united, Bruce Willis and Demi Moore formally split. All of Tinseltown was astounded. The duo, once viewed as the epitome of genuine romance, turned out to be merely another incomplete tale. Demi fell apart. She retreated from show business and took her 3 girls to Idaho, where the snow remains pale all year long and the quiet can slice into the soul.
She stated she did not wish to perform anymore. She just wanted to be a mom. But being a parent for someone who had once been harmed by her own mother was also a trek full of trials. She attempted to compensate her offspring, to become the flawless parent she had always desired. But in that attempt, there was something taut, burdensome, as though she were trying to atone for the small child inside herself, not for her kids. Years later, Rumor, her eldest girl, remembered that when she was tiny, she could sense her mother loved her, but she could also sense the awful dread in her eyes, as though losing them would mean she possessed nothing remaining. Demi existed quietly. No movies, no discussions, no uproars. People assumed she had quit for good. But existence,
as if never willing to let her relax, had other schemes. At a pal's natal celebration, she encountered Ashton Kutcher, a 25-year-old male nearly 15 years her junior. He was humorous, lively, full of vim, like a fresh gust blowing into Demi's frigid, mute spirit. They commenced conversing, then fell in affection. The public chuckled. People labeled them mother and boy, a publicity trick, the fantasy of a middle-aged dame who refuses to age. But Demi did not mind. After years of concealing, she was once again viewed with adoration, held by the palm, called babe. To her, this passion felt like sorcery. Ashton made her trust that years did not count, that bliss could still locate her, that perhaps this time fate would finally be gentle. She giggled more, lived lighter, adored fiercely, as though for the primary time. Observers said she has been resurrected. But nobody knew. Sometimes the very element that makes us feel youthful again is also what shatters us all over once more. In the days that ensued, time appeared to halt. Demi Moore, once the lady who made the entire globe look upwards, now sat mutely in a vacant chamber, listening to the clicking timepiece like a knife slicing through her reflections. No more parts, no more spectators, no one left to be robust for. Only a female stripped naked, face to face with her own terror. She once believed she had survived it all. Destitution, loss, solitude. But no, the profoundest agony arrived when she recognized she no longer understood who she was. In 2012, after weeks of sleepless evenings, extreme fasting, and an excess of sedatives and boosters, Demi Moore suddenly fell in the center of a gathering at her residence. When the emergency unit arrived, she was nothing but a weak, shaking form, her lips slurring unclear terms. The physicians identified her with acute bodily and mental depletion, a total disintegration after years of bearing gossip, isolation, and the stalking dread of desertion. The media encircled the clinic. Banners shouted that Demi Moore goes crazy for romance. The ghost beauty collapses from Hollywood deity to lost spirit. The press gathered like starving beasts, and she was too frail to resist. After being released, Demi vanished. She annulled all ventures, severed links with the press, retreated from Hollywood, and sought a spot to conceal. Some stated she was in recovery. Others asserted she had gone to a convent. A few mocked that this is the cost of maturing and conceit. But in reality, Demi was merely attempting to persist in the most literal manner. Every dawn she had to instruct herself how to respire again, slowly, gently, as though one deeper inhale might make her chest break. Some mornings she would unseal her eyes without knowing what date it was. She would just view daylight sifting through the drapes, motes drifting in the atmosphere, and hear the slight pulsing of her own chest. And yet, in those seemingly pointless instants, she started to sense something deeply actual, something she had long neglected amidst all the clamor of stardom, life itself. Demi commenced counseling. She conversed with experts, kept a daily log, penning down even her tiniest notions. Sometimes it was just one sentence. Today, I am still present. The subsequent day, I am still respiring. And one date she scribbled that she wants to exist. She learned to pardon, not for anyone else, but for herself. To absolve the dependent mom who harmed her, the male who quit her, those who deceived her, and that young lass she once was, the one who trusted that being adored was sufficient. During her mending, her 3 girls slowly came back. At first, it was tentative telephone rings, then actual hugs. They wept together, revisiting the years they had forfeited. Demi looked at them, visages both known and far, and for the primary time she felt tranquility. She stated, they do not need a flawless mother, they just need mom. Bit by bit, she reconstructed her existence. The opulent items gradually vanished from her house. In their stead were volumes, perfumed wicks, and bordered kin pictures. She rehearsed yoga, strolled by the pond, and spent moments with herself without feeling culpable. She ceased wearing cosmetics when going out. She no longer attempted to be more youthful, prettier, or more worthy, things that had stalked her all her duration. She remarked that she used to stand in front of the glass and see only defects. Now she looks and sees a female who endured. Hollywood, as usual, swiftly neglected its old luminaries. But oddly, Demi no longer required its radiance. She no longer desired acknowledgement. The sole thing she wished was to be authentic. In 2019, Demi Moore released her autobiography, Inside Out. The tome was not merely an admission, but the barest trek of a spirit that had been injured. In it, she narrated everything: her broken youth, her weddings, her collapses, and the dim nooks of her existence that the globe had never known. She wrote in a composed tone, without accusation, without decoration. By then, Demi had learned to view existence through comprehension. The volume became a sensation not because of controversy, but because people saw themselves in it. The tiny, brittle, solitary portions that everyone has experienced. Readers were astonished to encounter a Demi Moore who no longer concealed, no longer gripped to ego, a 57-year-old lady who no longer dreaded maturing, unattractiveness, or desertion, only the fear of living unfaithful to herself. She re-emerged in public, no longer as the erotic figure, but as a female with calm eyes, silver strands, creases, and a gentle grin, as if at last she had located what all her years of stardom could never purchase: serenity. When queried what made her so robust, Demi simply beamed and stated, "She is not strong. She just did not have any other option but to get back up." And that is the bravery of someone who has touched the very floor of hopelessness and still dared to move ahead.
Now, gazing back, the public sees a different Demi Moore. No longer the glitzy shape on the crimson rug, but a genuine human with marks, yet with a tender glow beaming from the very spots once shattered. She spends most of her time with kin and contemplation, scribbling and laboring on tiny creative tasks. She has nothing remaining to demonstrate. Some evenings she sits by the pool, watching the satellite mirrored on the liquid and beams. Because finally, after years of sprinting, she has come home to herself. And perhaps if someone were to inquire what is the most valuable thing she has learned from all those forfeits, Demi would quietly answer that I do not need to be loved to exist. I exist first, and then learn to love genuinely. The initial gleam of daybreak did not come from the skyline. It came from within her. Not a sudden rousing, but a hushed, quivering spark, tiny yet actual. Demi Moore, in her quiet chamber where the breeze slid through the pane, opened her eyes for the primary time in months and did not desire to perish. She still felt hollow, still ached, still sensed her frame fracturing every time she brushed against a remembrance. But something had shifted. A delicate strand of luminescence linked her to existence again. She commenced with the tiniest matters, cleansing her visage, getting clad, tidying the dwelling that had once been a combat zone. She gathered old photographs, faces that had once made her chuckle, now mere outlines of recollection. But instead of ripping them apart like previously, she slowly swiped away the grit and placed them back on the ledge. She told herself she will not conceal any more. Counseling appointments started. At first she detested them. She loathed having to remember, to confront, to label the agony. But it was in those instants when she wept, when she shook, talking about her cruel youth, about watching her mom ruin herself, about the horror of desertion, that she was truly living. Maybe she scribbled in her log that we do not have to be tough all the time. Perhaps valor is simply the act of staring at the lesion without turning away. Demi began to compose, at first just a few brief sentences. Then, incrementally, she penned her whole existence, every shard, every mark. She wrote to comprehend, to absolve, to mend. The sheets became medication, and eventually a chart guiding her back to herself. She returned to yoga, to reflection, to her respiration, something she once mocked when others cited it. But when you have stood at the brink of demise, you learn to value even the deed of taking a single inhale. One morning during contemplation, she suddenly wept, not from hurt, but because for the primary time she felt calmness, a buoyancy as if decades of load had hoisted from her shoulders. She no longer required anyone to make her complete. She no longer required affection to exist. She no longer required beams, acclamation, or laud. All she required was herself, and that was sufficient. When Demi came back, Hollywood had altered. The folks she once shone beside were now fables of another age. Younger, more glitzy stars filled the displays. Yet oddly, she no longer felt jealousy or dread. She picked smaller, profounder roles, ventures that let her speak her verity, about women, about sorrow, about mending. On location, she was no longer the cinema queen, but a female who had tumbled into the deepest gloom and persisted to narrate the saga. People saw it in her gaze, something candid, human, distinct. And then, when her memoir, Inside Out, was distributed, the globe fell mute. In every sentence, Demi was no longer a film star, no longer someone's former spouse, no longer a beauty idol.
She was simply a female, standing naked before her own existence, daring to tell what others conceal. People dubbed her a symbol of metal, but to her it was not boldness, it was reality. And sometimes reality, even when abrasive, is an act of emancipation. In one interview, when asked if she has any remorse, she grinned and said no. If she hadn't gone through all of it, she would never have known who she truly is. Demi once lost everything: funds, glory, wedlock, belief. But the only thing she gripped to and eventually found again was herself. At 60, she no longer hunts for romantic passion, nor attempts to demonstrate herself. She exists leisurely, relishing tranquil mornings with her hounds, reading, doing yoga, occasionally appearing in an indie movie or stepping on a podium to talk about her trek of self-repair. Some say Hollywood has neglected her, but perhaps it is Hollywood that has been left behind. Demi no longer requires the focal point. She has located her own luminance, one that originates from within, a light no one can ever remove. And when you view her today, that soft grin, placid eyes, assured stride, you will comprehend that some folks are most lovely when they no longer try to be. There are lesions that once you dare to handle them, turn into pinions. Demi Moore has ascended not as a Hollywood luminary, but as a woman who once scorched, once turned to cinders, and learned how to be birthed again from her own debris. There is a citation Demi Moore adores: "We cannot commence a fresh chapter if we keep rereading the old one." She once attempted to cling to the ancient sheets of her life, the parts, the affairs, the galas, the red carpet beams, as if letting go would mean vanishing. But she recognized what vanished was never her, only the likeness others constructed of her. And when she ceased gripping, that was the instant she was truly resurrected. In the late 2010s, Demi appeared on a small chat program in New York. No evening frock, no heavy paint, just her long tresses draped softly and a benevolent grin. She spoke about her voyage in a deep, steady tone that sometimes shook with feeling. The chamber fell silent. No one saw the movie idol Demi Moore. They saw a woman who had once been broken but learned to patch herself back together with affection. The most significant thing, she said, is not how far you tumble, but how you choose to ascend again. In that instant, many people wept because they saw themselves in her. Someone who had lost, been solitary, adored the wrong person, and thought their life was finished. But it wasn't. She and they were still here, still respirating, still walking, still able to start again. Demi no longer seeks approval. She uses her moniker for something else, appearing in mental wellness awareness drives, sharing her tale at women's recovery hubs. She does not instruct like a specialist, but speaks like someone who has tracked through inferno and come back carrying a small lantern for those still wandering in the murk.
Once at a gathering, a young girl came up to her and embraced her tightly, crying that she once thought she couldn't make it. But after reading her story, she changed her mind. She wants to live. Demi held the lass close. In her eyes, there was no grief, only thankfulness. Because if one life can make another choose to exist, then every pain she bore was worth it. Today, people still ask her what makes her happiest now. She beams, being unbound, free from my own dreads, free from having to be flawless, free from the images others mandate, free to be incorrect, to be frail, to be actual. Perhaps true bliss doesn't come when we have everything, but when we are brave enough to release. And Demi has released. Let go of the past. Let go of bitterness. Let go of the conviction that she must be cherished to exist. In a scarce social media entry, she wrote that she used to be someone who kept sprinting after affection, but in the end, she realized affection had never left her. It was here in her heart, in every scar, every tear. She just needed to open herself to see it. The accompanying picture showed her sitting by a pane, sunlight spilling over her naked face, eyes squinting, smiling gently like the afternoon beam. No names, no praises, no spectators. That is Demi Moore, the female who once rose from cinders, now at peace like a soft gust. Looking back, her trek mirrors that of many others, those who loved until they snapped, who were deceived, who destroyed themselves, who once wanted to vanish. But somewhere in the gloom, they found a tiny glow, from a person, a word, or a fragile belief that said, "I can still be distinct." And that small belief, no matter how faint, rescued them. If you are watching this clip, maybe you too are somewhere along that trek. Maybe you are forcing a grin through a heavy date. Maybe you feel not adequate, not lovely enough, not tough enough. Maybe you are thinking you do not think you can make it. But you know what? Demi Moore once thought the same, and she is still here, smiling, living, lovely in the truest way. So if today you only have the vigor to do one thing, just respire. If you can only say one thing to yourself, say, "I will not surrender," because sometimes enduring today is already a marvel. Don't try to forget the past. Let it help you comprehend yourself. Don't hide your wounds. Let them teach you benevolence. And don't be afraid to start again, because life always opens new chapters, even when you think it is over. Demi Moore once lost everything and then gained it all back in a different way, not through glory, not through anyone's affection, but through herself. That is the greatest triumph. If you see yourself in this narrative, leave a mark in the feedback, so I know somewhere out there are still people learning to rise again. And do not forget to follow, because here, every story is a real piece of soul, a place where we do not paint life in rose, but learn to mend from our lesions together.